This is not unusual for us. Back in the olden days, our building was right across here, the Common Sense store. You can see pictures of it in our deli. So many times in this very park, we had weddings, we had celebrations, we had all kinds of events, dancing in this park, our children all out here. So many people saw our children. They saw the activities that we did together. Together is a word that we love because it's everything about our life is that we're together. Many things have happened in Island Pond. This is an amazing place. My wife, Annette, grew up in this town. Annette Trudeau. You might know the Trudeau name. Her sister still lives in town. Many relatives, Deliverance. Famous. She's famous in my life. I want to read this. We have these over at our deli. It says it happened in Island Pond long ago. Now in Island Pond, I'll do something else. When we had our building over there, we had a celebration room on the 3rd floor. And we never sanded the floor because 300 people danced on that floor. And it was so smooth. So that building, we also had our print shop in there. That's what I ran. A few of us ran a print shop. It was called Parchment Press. And we did printing for all the town, all the people, you know. I think I might have even done things for Albert and Liberty, you know, and Craig Gillette, all the people in town here. Our little print shop served here from 1979 to 1991. We moved it 2 weeks before our building burnt down, so I was thankful for that. So we've been around. And like Nehemiah said, we're the ones, we're getting a little wiser now. We have gray hair. And our children are the ones that are taking after us and going forward. Looking back over the last 50 years, we are filled with wonder and awe. Do you know what awe is? You ever heard that? It's when something happens and you go, awe.
Takes your breath away.
It takes your breath away, right. Like we are amazed at what's happened in our lives. The work of holy angels over the years, of having things in the right place at the right time, helping us. We're filled with wonder and awe over what the God of heaven has done in our individual lives, but especially how he has brought a holy nation out of the dust of this rapidly decaying society. That little seed that first sprouted in Chattanooga, Tennessee, which I went down to Chattanooga. I found the community in Chattanooga, Tennessee. I grew up in Bolton, Mass. And then I went to a little school and met with Annette. And that's how I started being around Island Pond. That was in 1975. So that first sprouted, a little seed sprouted in Chattanooga in the 1970s. So that was in the 1970s. And that seed was incubated here in this nice warm climate, in this nice set-apart place, this wonderful warm environment of Island Pond. In the early 80s, and it has become the 12 tribes, a worldwide movement of the Holy Spirit in these last days. On June 22nd, 1984, That little sprout was almost destroyed by an ill-conceived plot to take 112 children away from the parents of the church in Island Palm. We're called the Northeast Kingdom Community Church. So people started knowing us as the church in Island Palm. We are eternally grateful that our Father in heaven appointed a righteous judge that day in the Vermont Supreme Court to uphold our constitutional rights and return our precious children. As you know, that story made national news and continues to be of great interest to scholars. But there's a much deeper and more profound story behind the church in Island Palm. Who were those people and what brought them together to live in such a contrasting way of life? What has happened in their lives, in the lives of these families, and their movement in the last 40 years? Looking back at everything that happened in all our lives, all we can say is that it was a miracle. There was a miracle that happened here in Island Pond, and that miracle had to do with people's hearts who wanted to know the truth and wanted to live their whole lives for God, no matter what. And these are some of the people from Jean and Pauline Sage, Suzette and Richard DeLabriere, Andy and Jackie Massey. These are names that people know. Some people from Barton, Francis, and Carolyn. So our lives over these years have grounded us more and more with knowing that the God of heaven wants a life on this earth that people can see. That people can see that there's a difference of the people that love our Father and people that just are in the world. And so that seed sprouted here in Island Pond. And Island Pond welcomed us. Those of us that were down in Chattanooga, Tennessee, came up here to Island Pond. And it wasn't easy for this town in the beginnings. It was, I don't know, there's a couple hundred of us, almost 300 people that came to live in Island Pond. We ended up having 16 buildings. We had many businesses. We started cottage industries, a soap shop, print shop, every kind of thing that we could do in this town. Woods grew, of course. So we just want to welcome you today to get to know us and understand that we are going forward. And like Nehemiah said, we have been the little sprout like a dandelion, that when you blow a dandelion, those seeds go all over the place. And that's what happened from this town. And we are so thankful for Little Island Pond.
I'm really glad to be here. My wife and I came up from Brunswick, Georgia. We live there in Brunswick now, but we first met the community in Chattanooga, Tennessee. My wife is from Chattanooga. I'm from Memphis originally, and I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, and during the troublesome time in my life, and during the troublesome time of the 60s. In 1968, I graduated from high school, and Martin Luther King was assassinated in my hometown. And so it threw a lot of turmoil into racial issues and problems during that time. And so I wanted to go away to school somewhere, but I didn't know exactly where. So I got some grant money to come to Chattanooga, of all places. I've never been there before, and I can see how it was our Father leading that to happen, because I grew up a Southern Black Baptist all my life, but I saw there was something empty about it. There was something wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it. And I wanted to be serious about serving God, but I didn't know how to do it. I didn't want to be a preacher, and I didn't want to be a missionary. So I said, what can I do? So I came to Chattanooga, and I went to school there, and 4 years. And, well, I thought I went to teach school, but it didn't work out good because school had really disintegrated in a lot of ways in my mind. And so then I took a job at Quaker Oats and worked there for 4 years and wasn't satisfied with that. And so then we met the community around 1974. My wife and I went to one of the Yellow Delis in '74 for our second anniversary. And it was an amazing thing that happened. Someone told us about it, so we went, and we were the only Afro-Americans in there, and I felt a little uncomfortable at first. And so we were eating our meal, and a lot of things on the menu I wasn't familiar with. I'm familiar with hot dogs and hamburgers and things like that, but this had more like, roast beef and corned beef and all those kinds of things. So the waitress helped us to pick out a meal, and then after the meal was over, she asked if we wanted a dessert. And I said, yeah, I think so. My wife was kind of kicking me on the table and said, well, I don't think we have enough money for that. But I said, well, we'll get it anyway. So anyway, we got it, and somehow the waitress found out it was our anniversary, and so she came and went in the back and came out with a guitar, so I was singing, and it really embarrassed me really bad. Oh, a happy anniversary to us. And everybody in the little restaurant, right then it was only about 10 tables, and everybody was looking at us. Anyway, it was good in a way, and so I wanted to pay for my meal. So I went to pay for my meal, and they wouldn't let me pay for it. And that really disturbed me. Remember, there's racial tension going on here, and so they wouldn't let me pay. So I said, well, I want to pay for it. They said, no, you can't pay. So I said, why not? I said, well, we don't want to give it to you. We just want to give it to you as an offering of love. I never heard of that before. Well, okay. I said, but I still want to pay. They said, no. So they went and got the manager. So the manager came out and said, you still want to pay? I said, yeah, I want to pay for it. He said, well, I'll tell you what to do. If you want to pay for it, this is what you do. I was like, what is it? He says, we have a married couples meeting every Wednesday night at our place. If you and your wife come for that meeting, then you won't have to pay. I thought he was challenging me. I looked him in the eye, I said, I'm coming. So I did. I went. And, to make a long story short, it was the most amazing thing ever happened to us. Hawken was there. A few others were there. And it really broke down that barrier in me of what love is and what walls of hostility is. These people really loved us. We sat in a big room with a big fireplace singing songs. And then the thing that really got me was when they got up to, everybody started talking about their marriage. Everybody there was married, and they were young married, about the same age we were, about some of the problems that they were having in their marriage, and they were very open about it. And I looked at my wife, I said, man, it seems like they've been listening to us. About toothpaste on toothbrush, and running bath water, and clothes, and all, I'm not your mother, I'm not your father, just all these kinds of things. I was stunned at the openness and honesty of the people. Because they had a relationship with each other, they loved each other, they cared about each other. So we left that night, and I felt like, it burned. Something burned in me, made me mad, as well as made me glad at the same time. So how can that be? It's like I used to shave my face, and then I used to take this aqua velva and put it on. It would sting, but it would sting and feel so good at the same time. So I went back and told our pastor what happened, and he said, well, maybe you should go back. If it helped you, go back. So we went. So to make a long story short, we ended up giving up everything and moving in. I told the people at my job I no longer wanted to be there. I found something better. And my boss thought, oh, maybe I should give him a raise. So he tried to give me a raise. I said, well, it's not a financial problem. I didn't know how to explain it. I said, it's a spiritual problem. And so he said, well, maybe a raise will help you. So I knew it wouldn't, but I didn't know how to explain it, so I took it. And then I told him, I said, well, I'm not really satisfied with this. I think I want to be a salesman. He said, good. He said, we have a job opening in Atlanta. You can go down there and be that. So I went down and I told my wife, I said, okay, this is what we're going to do. I said, you go and we only had one daughter at the time. I said, you go and take her to the community and stay with them and see if they're for real or not. If they're real, you can see behind the scenes. Because I'm going to be gone for about 2 weeks. Back then we didn't have cell phones, so I didn't talk to her, she didn't talk to me. I said, we'll know. I said, if things go well, and God wants us to be with them, then he'll show you all the good things about the community, and show me all the bad things about this job. And we believed that. We really wanted it, because we were torn. Where to go, what to do. So for about a week and a half, 2 weeks, I didn't talk to her, she didn't talk to me, and I got back, and she had glowing reports about the people that she was living with, and things had happened. It really caused a lot of problems in the community, but she saw the hearts of the people, how they loved them. Someone was taken from the community and tried to deprogram them. And she saw how they prayed for them and didn't get mad at them. She said, I've never seen it. It's like the Bible being acted or put into practice. But me on the other end, I worked with these two salesmen, and they were really good guys, in a sense. They had good salesmen. They showed me all the tricks of the trade, and right at the same time, Captain Crunch had just come out. Captain Crunch was known for children's cereal. They grab it. Once they grab it, they wouldn't take it loose, and many sales went out. But anyway, their lives they were like closet alcoholics. You know, both of them been married and divorced twice, and on and on and on, and I was only like 22, 23 years old. You know, you could go and be gone for 2 or 3 nights a week, and everything they would pay for it. And that scared me. But anyway, to make a long story short, we didn't take it. And I told my parents, and told my folks, they thought I lost my mind. They thought I'd been voodoo. They said all kinds of things, you know. I said, no, I think I found something real, something I can live for it and train my children to do, and give them something for the future. And they never believed me until I finally moved in, and they start seeing some of the fruit of it later. But anyway, I'm thankful that in Chattanooga, the brothers there really loved me and helped me to break the barriers of the racial things and all the things that bound me together, and opened the door for me to be able to come to Allen Pond. Coming to Allen Pond was like another venture. I've never seen over 3 inches of snow in my life. Because I live in the South all my life. I came here and saw 3 feet of snow. And snow is considered bad news down south. Bad news. You don't drive in it, you don't move in it, you don't do anything. So anyway, we got used to it. So 4 of our children were born in the South, and 4 were born in the North. So there's no civil wars in our family. So we're glad to be here. We're glad that Allen Pond accepted us. We all moved from Chattanooga up to Allen Pond, sold our houses and business there, and moved up here. And from there, like we said, we went out to other places. We're down in southern Georgia now, and we're thankful to be there.
I want to tell you real quick, how my husband and I came to Allen Pond. And my husband, Zishael, can you stand up? Zishael, we've been married 52 years. We are a product of the 60s and the 70s. We were homesteading in Maine, and we had the homesteading dream. We had a beautiful log home that we had built, and we had draft horses, we had 3 little children, and we had organic maple syrup and gardening. We had the dream, the homesteading dream. And but we weren't happy, and we knew there was something that we had been created for that we weren't really doing. And we've wondered, what were we going to give our children, other than this beautiful farm of this life of homesteading. But we'd become Christians. We had grew up that way. But we were very disillusioned with Christianity. We tried this church, we tried that church, and we just could never be happy. And we just thought, surely the God of heaven had more in mind than going to church on Sunday and having a bean supper on Wednesday night. And that we were just longing for something more of a life that it seemed like they had the first church, the first believers. So to make it short, we found, we had some friends who told us to come here, and we're over in Maine, and we're only about 4 hours away, but it might as well have been California, because we had all these animals and children and responsibilities, but we finally made it over here. But we weren't looking for community, not at all. We were not looking. We'd grown up, we'd heard about the Jim Jones and drinking Kool-Aid and this guru and that guru and the guru and the Mercedes and all these groups. We were we don't want anything to do with that kind of people. But we decided we'd just come and check it out. And we just started falling in love with people, is what happened. And we stayed for a weekend. We went back to our farm, and a few months later, we'd come again. And people would come and see us and talk to us. And we just gradually really fell in love with these people. We realized that there was something to this life. And we came and we'd go back home and talk about it and really agonized over it. We had a beautiful farm, and we really agonized over it. But we came back, saw and heard more, and we go back and pray about it. It's just amazing how, so finally we came. My husband said, we drove back one time from Island Pond and he said, we're going to pack up, we're coming to Island Pond. I was pretty shocked because we had so much invested in this place. But we came, so thankful. We never looked back. And this is where we raised our 3 daughters, and this is where we were born again. This is where our life began, really, in Island Pond about 43 years ago. And we're just so thankful that we came, and that it's the love. It's the love. The theology, the doctrine, and all this. What do you think about this? What does the scripture say? I don't know. All I know is that I love those people, and they love me, and they have something that we don't have. Maybe it's not quite as glorious and beautiful as this homestead, but they had something that we wanted. I don't know what more to say. I promised I'd keep it under 5 minutes. So.
When I came, I was somebody who did not believe in God. I had rejected Christianity. I grew up in Chattanooga, in the Buffalo, the Bible Belt, and I never saw any reality beyond people who didn't claim to be Christians. I knew a lot of people who didn't claim to be Christians that really lived a much more moral life than a lot of Christians that I was around and that my parents were around. So, and that was also back during the 60s, going through all the rebellion of the 60s. So when I showed up at the Vine House, which was the house of the community at that time, we came to a rap session. And I came in there and it was full of these young people. And Gene Spriggs, who started all this from the part that he had, he was teaching these children that night. And at the end of it, I walked up to him and I said, can you live here? Because I was so affected by the love that I sensed in all the people, how they were, what they had to say. So I asked him, I said, can you live here? And he surprised me with his answer. And he said, yes. Yes. He didn't know me at all. And he said, yes. And he said, well, we don't really have any room. We need another house. And we're praying for another house. And I said, well, is there maybe somewhere that you can make for us? And he said, well, we have a walk-in closet on the 3rd floor of the house where the married couples live, but there's no, in that closet, there's no windows. But I guess we could clean it out. It's big enough to put a bed in there. And, you know, maybe a couple of little, you know, bedside tables or something. And I said, we'll take it. And we moved into this closet. And so that was the greatest decision I ever made in my life, was to move into that closet. So that was my introduction to the community. Now, there's a lot of things that were going on in Chattanooga that we didn't understand. We didn't really know what was going on. All we knew was that love was ruling those people. And that love was coming from our Savior, whom we called Yeshua. And most people call him Jesus, but his name was Yeshua. He was Jewish, and that's what people called him when he walked on the face of the earth, is Yeshua. So the love of Yeshua was ruling in those people. And it was exciting that there was finally a place where you could have that love in your heart. You could receive a gospel that cost you everything, and that the love of God could be poured out in your heart, and you have the power to live for other people. And that was being restored to what the church was in the first century. That gospel and that life. So that's where that restoration of the life that was in the early church, from the gospel that Yeshua taught his disciples and that they preached at Pentecost. And the result of that was that all the believers were together and had all things in common. That life was being restored. And we didn't talk about it in those terms. We were just excited about it. So that's what I want to say about what Chattanooga was. And the communities that sprung up in the neighboring towns around with Yellow Delis, which you're going to get to experience pretty soon, right up the street. Okay. And then Jay Howley, who's sitting right here and spoke earlier, he came down to Chattanooga, he found the Yellow Deli, he found us, he joined us, he got baptized down there, I think, I can't remember exactly when, came back up north, he was engaged to Annette, they got married, and he came back to Chattanooga. And that was the beginning of a relationship with Vermont, because she was from Island Pond. And the reason I'm saying this is because this leads up to the raid, okay? I'm going to say a few things about the raid, but my wife is going to speak later, and she's going to say more about the raid. But what I want to say is the connection that happened between Vermont and Chattanooga. Okay, so people from Vermont started coming down to see Annette and visiting the community, and they saw the life. And they were up here, and they were feeling the same kind of things that all of us were feeling before we were a part of the community. They were looking for a place where they could give their whole lives to love one another, and to serve one another, and to live for their God. And so when they saw the life that we had, they invited us to come up here. And that's how we got to Island Pond, was through an invitation. Through an invitation. And we had other groups down in the south that had given us invitations, and people were drawn to our life. But the people that were leading them never led those people to do what happened in Vermont. A miracle happened in Vermont. And that's really what this celebration is all about, is what that miracle was and where that has led us over the last 40-something years. Okay. So, when we started coming up here, before we came, we got together down south, and Gene Spriggs, Yonate, who we called Yonate, he got us together and he said, we're not going up there with any titles. We're not going up there with any kind of anything other than just the love of Yeshua in our heart. And we're going to go up there and serve those people. We're going to serve those Vermonters. They want the life that they've seen in us, and we're going to go there and we're going to be a demonstration of what that means. That we're spending our whole life pouring out our life serving one another and not living for ourselves. And so we came to Vermont not to tell these people what to do, but to live with them, interact with them. And it was amazing. We were like Southern rebels. We didn't know anything. We barely had children. Our children were real small. And we came to these salt of the earth Vermonters. These families that were like families we'd never hardly ever seen before. And you know what these Vermonters did? They submitted to us because of the life that we had. And you know what we did? We submitted to them. And something miraculous happened. There was a bonding of two groups of people that were willing to do our Father's will. That's what happened. And that was a miracle. And that hadn't happened in 2,000 years where something like that would go on. Where that gospel would produce that life that Yeshua established when he was on the earth. And that bond was just like the beginning. It was just the beginning. And so here we were, and we were living up here. They opened up their homes. The women, these women, they had a life. They were like, they had a life. They had older children that were going to high school, and whatnot. And they were inviting our young women into their kitchens. What do you think about that? They were sharing their kitchens with people that didn't, in their own houses that they gave up. And they let these Southerners move in there. And it was a miracle, I'm telling you, an absolute miracle. Okay, but along with that came one of the promises of the gospel. It's recorded in Mark 10. And it talks about, it says that no one who has given up father, mother, brother, sister, farms, all your possessions, everything that you have, will receive 100 times in this life, along with persecutions.
Amen.
Along with persecutions. In the age to come, eternal life. And so it had already started somewhat in Chattanooga. When we got up here, that's when that kind of persecution began, of people coming against the life that we had, that was coming forth from obedience to the Word of God. And it really was the Word of God being lived out in people that became the problem. It became a problem here, which led to the raid in 1984. So I was here on that day. It was an amazing day. There's just one more thing I want to say about it. 3 weeks before the raid, my wife and I were down in Tennessee, and we were in a campground with Gene and Marshall Spriggs, and my oldest son, who was 7 years old. One morning, he woke up in his tent and he was crying, really distressed, and he was calling out for his mother. And so he came out of the tent, and we were already up. We were out of the tent, and Marcia Spriggs was out of her tent. And he came running over to his mother, and she said, "Honey, what's wrong? What happened?" And he said, "I had this terrible dream. He said, "We were in Allen Pond, and we were up at the Maples, up on the hill up there. And I looked down at the lake, and all the community was gathered at the lake, and behind them was a tsunami, was a big, huge wave. And it was coming towards them, and they didn't see it. And there was nothing I could do about it. And I watched, and that big wave broke over the top of all of them. And I was so afraid everybody was going to be destroyed. And then the water went away. Their mother says, and then what happened? And he says, and the water went away, and they were all standing, and nobody was hurt. And so then Marcia said to her husband, come here, I want to tell you something. And he said, what is it? And she said, I had the exact same dream last night. So the 7-year-old boy and this very respected woman in the community had the same dream. And it was a warning to us that something was coming. So on the day of the raid, when we were here, and in the house that we were in, when the state trooper knocked on our door, and he said, get up, get dressed, come downstairs, we're here to take the children. And my wife turned to me and she said, honey, what are we going to do? And I said, it's the dream. This is the dream. So I said, come on, get dressed, get the children up, let's go. And so we did. And so people that are going to speak after me are going to tell you more about that.
That was Ed Wiseman from Chattanooga. And now we're going to hear from his wife, Jean Wiseman. She was here on the day of the raid as well.
I was here on the day of the raid, and a year later, I moved into Island Pond, and I've been with the 12 tribes ever since. And just before I start this, I found this picture in my archives. It's a picture from 1987 when we were celebrating the 3rd anniversary of the raid, right in this park. And it was my first testimony of the raid 37 years ago. Now, can you hear me? Will you say yes?
Yes.
Yes?
Say something. Stay close.
Okay. Okay. I'm up here basically to talk to you about Judge Mayiti. But before I talk to him, over on the table under that little tent over there is a little book called A Passion for Truth and Justice. And there's a little 3-page intro by me, a current message from me, what I have to say 40 years later. And it's Judge Mayiti's opinion, his complete opinion. And I encourage anybody who's interested to take it and read it, because it can't be found in law books. Because it was a trial court decision. Just trial court decisions are not reported. So only we have it. You can't find it anywhere else, except maybe on our website. You can find it on our website. Okay. Now, what I'm going to read to you, Judge Mayiti died in 1992, 8 years after the raid, and I was asked to be one of 4 people who eulogized him. That means speak at his funeral. And so, the second half of what I'm going to read, I'm going to read you that. But then in 2012, I can't even remember the reason, but there was some reason that I was inspired to write why we honor Judge Mayiti. And so, I'm going to start with that. We remember Judge Mayiti's courage. He followed his conscience to defend the rights of us as parents, to raise our children according to the dictates of our conscience, as directed by the Word of God, and to protect our children. He halted the state's effort in Vermont gently and with determined effectiveness. He halted their effort to take the children away in the 1984 Island Pond raid. I was also here that day, the day of the raid. We have heartfelt appreciation for Judge Mayiti over the years. We were chosen by him before he died to participate in his funeral in a powerful way. He followed the law and the Constitution and searched out the matter before making a decision that would have been based on public pressure and unfounded lies that came from accusations. And the story of it all is over there. And it's also in the deli. As a result, we've honored him for 40 years as what we call a man of the nations, because he returned our children to their parents without granting the state's request to examine them all for signs of abuse. Instead, he looked at the evidence before him. The children themselves, they were in court with them. Every family went, about half of us went into court. Parents with their children. The other half didn't give their names, so they just waited in the gym across the street. And he concluded that the children were healthy and happy, respectful and responsive. Judge Mayiti died 8 years later in August 1992, and how his life and our lives intersecting back then still affects us today. In June of that year, we had a raid celebration at the Basin Farm. We invited Judge Mayiti to come so that we could honor him in person. But he couldn't accept because he was already seriously compromised by cancer. Some of you grown children that were taken in the raid might remember that our father showed us a way to honor him anyway. I arranged with his wife Sherry, to be able to sing to him over the phone. There's a picture of that over in that gallery. Dozens of children, now 8 years older, gathered on the hillside in front of the farmhouse at the Basin Farm. As the children exuberantly sang into the extended phone receiver, I was holding the phone, with Judge Mayiti straining to hear every word from his sickbed. We sang several songs, Arising and Shining, Be Glad and Rejoice, for a nation is being born, and there is life in a stream. At the end, the children screamed out with all their hearts, "We love you, Judge Mayiti." He was so very appreciative. So much so that nearly 3 months later, when he was on his deathbed at Dartmouth, Hitchcock, and Hanover, New Hampshire, his dying request was that the children of Island Pond come sing. And that indeed is what we did. We went to his bedside and sang him several songs. Although he was comatose and unable to open his eyes, he smiled sweetly and he nodded his head in appreciation as if hearing every word. He squeezed my hand in thanksgiving. A day or so later, August 18th, 1992, he died. Within hours, we got a phone call from a fellow judge letting us know that before his death, he had made his wish known that my husband would be one of his pallbearers and that I would be one of 4 people to speak at his funeral in Burlington. This was pretty shocking at the time. In addition, he asked that the people of Island Pond sing at my funeral. Now mind you, his funeral was in St. Michael's Cathedral in Burlington, Vermont. It's a big cross in the cathedral. So, like the sanctuary is right in the middle, and there's people on all sides in the shape of a cross. It seems somehow that he was so proud of us, and he wanted everyone to see how we really were. There were 12 Catholic priests come celebrating that Mass. I mean, they're all there in their robes and everything. At the funeral, it looked like the whole state government of Vermont was in attendance. The church was packed with dignitaries and friends from all over the state and beyond. Judges, legislators, the entire Vermont Supreme Court, and the governor himself, Howard Dean, was there. Hawken wore a crimson shirt made for him by Miriam Hunn and wore men's Seuss pants. We were wearing those at the time. as he led the procession carrying Judge Mahay's casket. A photo capturing that was on the front page of the Burlington Free Press. I spoke the following remarks to a hushed crowd, after which we sang the song, which our friends are going to do for you in a little while. It's called When a Man Dies, Will He Live Again? The words and melody rose through the rafters to the sky above. Many wept and wiped away tears. It's surely a moment and experience I'll never forget. Now this is what our tribute to him was at that funeral. So this is from 32 years ago. I'm so happy to be here today, knowing that it was Judge Mahay's wish that I could speak to you on behalf of my people, the communities in Island Pond, Burlington, Bellows Falls, and Westminster. We're honored today to be able to express thanksgiving and appreciation for Frank Mahaydi, a man who lived according to his conscience and judge those who came before him justly according to the law of the nations. That law is the Constitution. Were it not for his commitment to such justice, we as a people might well have been prevented from passing on our faith to our children. As we have told Judge Mahaydi himself, we also want to proclaim to you. We believe that Frank Mahaydi is a righteous man of the nations who will be blessed in eternity because he fulfilled the purpose he was created for when he delivered us as a people, June 22nd, 1984, by adhering to his conscience, the law, the Constitution, when he did what was right, rather than to compromise his conscience and his office in order to win the favor of those in power or of public opinion in Vermont. I'm not going to tell you, some of you were here then, but the public and the press was really against the church at the time. In the one case I was handling, we had 283 exhibits to show the prejudicial publicity to the people in Island Pond, to show it to the court. There are not many, if any, who would have done the same. Instead of satisfying those who were against us, he chose to obey his conscience no matter what. And in doing so, he pleased God. Judge Mahaydi was a good man, a fair man. He was devoted to ruling with justice. He was humble, and he treated people kindly. We give great glory to our God for such men as Frank Mahaydi. They are few and far between. Indeed, those who use their instinctive knowledge of good and evil to judge righteously regardless of the consequences. Such men and women are worthy of the nations, where, for all eternity, they will rule as they would by the glory of God's light, because they chose to do good and not evil in this life. Our Father is going to judge everybody for how they live their life. That's the test, how people live their lives. There will be nations in the eternal age to come. They will be filled with people like Judge Mahaydi. In this age, however, the nations are like a battleground, where there's a constant contest between good and evil. There are always those in power, probably like never before, who use it wrongly, selfishly, or with unrighteous motives. Others rule wisely as servants, striving to do right and to punish justly those who do wrong. The Word of God says that, quote, He made every nation of mankind to live on all the earth, having determined their appointed times and boundaries, that they should seek God if perhaps they might grope for him and find him, though he is not far from each one of us. Frank Mayiti was a man who groped for God. As a judge, he ruled righteously and he groped for justice. Everyone must die and face death. The question is, when a man dies, will he live again? After the separation of death, which is agonizing and lonely, every man and every woman will be judged according to their conscience. How they live their life in accordance with their own personal knowledge of good and evil. That's how where every person will spend eternity will be judged. It is good news that man does not need to be separated from God forever if he chooses good. Last week, a friend of Judge Mayiti's told me, now this is, again, 32 years ago. Last week, a friend of Judge Mayiti's told me that as he considered the truth, he came to the conclusion that the first church was the truest demonstration of God that he could find. Now we know it, but a lot of you guests might not know it, but that's what the church in Island Pond, the 12 tribes, is based on, is the first church. It made my heart happy to know that about him. I too know that is the truth. It made me wish that he and I had taken the time to talk about these things, the kingdom of God and the truth of the Word. We had always intended to, but never quite made the time. I'm deeply thankful, though, that Frank Mayiti and I became friends in the waning months of his life. That was 1992. When I saw him a week ago today, which was August 1992, as life was slipping away from him, he softly requested, "I want to hear the children sing. Can I hear the children sing?" And last Sunday he did. He rested in weakness and smiled as he heard the littlest ones singing praises to our God who seeks justice on the earth. Frank Mayiti was a man who sought justice. God will acknowledge him for that for all eternity. The one who died for justice to reign forever and ever is the Son of God. He was the cornerstone upon which the first church was established. You know, that's the church you read about in the Bible, all the different churches, that church. And the church in the book of Acts. He made a way for us. He was the one who commanded his followers to sell their property and possessions and to share what they had with each other, as anyone might have need. Those who believed in him lived together with one mind, taking, the press called it brainwashing. That's what the press called brainwashing, because we all believe the same thing about the Word of God. It's funny, huh? Okay, taking their meals together with gladness and sincerity of heart, praising God and devoting themselves to their master's teaching. At that time, in 1992, there were about 500 of us in Vermont who were eternally grateful to our God and to Frank Mayiti because he protected our right to believe these things and to live according to the dictates of our consciences. He had wisdom to see that though any of us might stumble, we should not be judged wrongly because of our association with one another. We praise God for the integrity of Frank Mayiti, and we pray continually that it would be given to men such as he to rule at every level of government and anywhere where we might be. And we continue to pray this very same thing today, because it's the only way that we're going to be able to survive. The persecution is going to get really bad as the decades go forward. In his 1984 decision, he affirmed that the First Amendment guarantees both freedom of religion and freedom of association. I want you all to understand that. The reason all those children and parents were taken in was merely because they associated with one another, because they belonged to the group in Island Pond. That's why they were taken into court. Judge Mayiti correctly discerned that the state's case against our people was based solely on their association with the church in Island Pond, and not on evidence of individual wrongdoing by specifically named people. He found this to be totally unacceptable and outside the bounds of the law, and he severely rebuked Vermont state officials. Now remember to take one of these. His whole opinion's in there. It's in 5 parts, so you can digest it piece by piece. The government is only allowed to intrude into the lives of individuals when there is probable cause or some compelling reason to do so. What Vermont sought to do in our case was to detain each child as a ransom until their parents cooperated with the state's investigation, trying to force them to answer questions about their faith, their religion, and the practice of their faith. Such a practice is called investigative detention in this country, and it's illegal. Judge Mayiti informed the state in no uncertain terms that is what they were doing, and that claim of preventing child abuse, which went far and wide, it still does today, was entirely pretextual. That means a front. It was just a front, done in an effort to bypass the demands of the law. And I want you to know that one of the attorneys I was in there in court the day of the raid for every one of those 40 hearings. And one by one, Judge Mayiti was sending the children home with their parents because none of them looked in danger to him. And he would always ask the state, okay, why is this child in danger? And they never had anything on that child. And so by the afternoon, the state was getting pretty frustrated. That they could see that every child was being sent home. And he said, he asked one of the state's attorneys, okay, what about this child? What's the danger here? And he said, the danger, Your Honor, is the bacteria of the teachings of this church. It's like a disease. He said that. And I want to tell you, the truth was exposed that day, because that was the reason for the Island Pond raid. And Judge Mayiti saw it. And he called a spade. And he's the one that told the whole state of Vermont and the world really that the whole child abuse thing was pretextual, a pretext, not the real issue. It's very important that y'all understand that. Judge Mayiti noted, even the state admits that there was not one single piece of evidence in the material submitted to the court that documents a single act of abuse or neglect with regard to any of the 112 children that were seized. The state acknowledged that. So that shows you that even they knew they had no evidence. Therefore, there was no basis to interfere with our families. He recognized the fact that freedom of children and parents to relate to one another in the context of the family, free of governmental interference, is a basic liberty long established in our constitutional law. For similar reasons, the search and seizure, not only of the children, but of many personal records, journals, diaries, letters, was found in violation of the Fourth Amendment. That means you can't be searched or seized unreasonably. He found it to be a grossly illegal and unconstitutional scheme. Judge Mayiti would not permit the state to rely on the wrongly taken items. You know, they would take out, pieces of wood used to hold up a window open. Like this one in the room we're standing right now in the springhouse. There's a block of wood holding up the window. They would take that out of the window and they would give it to the court and say, this is what they beat their children with. And this happened in the raid. The care and precision with which Honorable Frank Mayiti wrote his decision will be cherished and used by us for decades to come. We hope you can digest his lessons of history and tell your children about it. On his tombstone, Judge Mayiti requested that the names of 3 cases be inscribed. Top of the list was Island Pond. If anybody has any more questions of me, feel free to ask me afterwards.
Thank you.
We have a special person here, Charles Campbell's daughter, that we heard from earlier.
Marsha Ruth.
Marsha Ruth.
So maybe people want to know, what was it like for the children that were in the raid? Because that's why we're here. There's not all 112 children are here today, but I can speak up for, I can represent part of us probably, that we learned that a miracle happened. But we didn't realize that we were in the midst of it. Our life is made up of many families. Obviously, we moved. Like we heard the stories of moving from Chattanooga to Island Pond. But we were very loved and cared for, and obviously, and maybe that was a threat to the world. But what I'm very thankful for is the stories that we were told stories about God and about how He delivered His people. He had a special people, Israel, and He was going to deliver them if they were obedient to Him. And so we heard the stories of Him parting the Red Sea for the Israelites, and we heard the stories of Paul and Silas in the jail, and David and Goliath. I think most of the world probably knows these stories, but the difference is we were being raised to believe that the same kind of faith that the people in the Bible had, that enabled God to do those amazing miracles, was the faith that we were supposed to have as children. That we were supposed to have enough faith, like Goliath, like David, to kill Goliath. And we were going to be raised in a way that would help us to trust God that much, that we wouldn't lean on our own strength for anything. And we really liked those stories. We thought they were pretty great. So little did we know at 6 o'clock in the morning, when our houses were surrounded by police officers, that we were gonna be learning through watching those that went before us what that faith looks like. So I was 5 years old at the raid, and it was quite scary. Early in the morning, strangers coming in your house and telling our parents that they needed to bring us all to one room, and so our parents complied, but it was clear that there was peace in the house. Those police officers, I think they came in thinking they would find violence or something, but we knew as long as we could trust our parents that there was going to be peace. And we could look out the window because we had our neighbors 2 houses down, or the house next to us. We saw that it was happening to all of us. 15 houses in this town of Island Pond. It was happening to all of us at the same time. So, for sure there was a scary feeling as we went out of our houses and loaded up on all the buses. The street that we were on was on this side of town, the pleasant side of town, and I feel like I remember 5 or 6 buses lined up in front of our house. And so, as long as we could hold our parents' hands and go out there, we realized that everybody was loading up at the same time, and it was a very tense feeling at first. And I have this memory of getting up, climbing the bus stairs, and looking and seeing all of my friends from the next household. And one of them had a guitar. It was actually Nehemiah's father. He had a guitar with him. And I was so relieved. I knew that you couldn't rip our life away from us. We were going to take it with us. And so the story goes, I'm sure that we could read it on the wall there. But I'm going to skip to the very end when our day was concluded. We didn't leave the gymnasium without singing a song that I'll never forget. And it says, "If God be for us, who can be against us?" And I think it was maybe almost 300 people singing. And my 5-year-old heart knew that that was a miracle, like parting the Red Sea. When the answer was nobody, 350 people yelled, "Nobody!" with all of our heart. And it wasn't because we were strong and mighty, but it was because we trusted in the only one that's strong and mighty. So I'm very grateful that we can celebrate this today.
Amen.
We're going to sing you the song that we sang in that big church that day that Pablo was talking about. There was probably, 1,000 people in there. I'd never been in a church like that, and it was, you could hear a pin drop. It was so amazing. But this song is a song of hope.
It was our message to Judge Mayiti.
It was written in honor of Judge Mayiti. It comes from the book of Job, Job 14, I believe.
14.
Yeah. A flower comes forth, like a flower he fades. A man flees like a shadow, he does not remain. His days you determine, his months you have cast. Have appointed bounds which he cannot pass. Turn from him your gaze till he's done his days. Turn from him your gaze till he's done his days. When a man dies, will he live again? When a man lies down, will he rise again? After the days of his service, after the days of his pain, when a man dies, will he live again? Will he reign until his release comes? He will call and be heard. He will call and be heard.
It may flourish again when scent of water is found. It will put forth its spring like a young plant again. It will put forth its spring like a young plant again. And when a man dies, will he live again? When a man lies down, will he rise again? After the days of his service, after the days of his pain, when a man dies, will he live again? He will wait until his release comes. He will call and be heard. He will call and be heard. When a man dies, will he live again? When a man lies down, will he rise again? After the days of his service, after the days of his pain, when a man dies, will he live again? He will wait until his release comes. He will call and be heard. He will call and be heard.
Okay, come up here. And my two little girls. They're not little anymore. This is Leah and Sarah. Sarah hurt her foot, so she's hopping a little bit. This is a little bit of our story of the day of the raid. Okay. On June 21st, I went to Massachusetts to get some printing equipment. And Lloyd Forkey, or we call him Tim Shaw, some of you old-time Island Ponders might remember him. He used to work on the ambulance crew here, and some of our people did the fire department, really helped the town. He worked with me in the print shop. So we went down to Boston area, and we got some printing equipment. And we had our old bread van. And this bread van was one of those old, like a Wonder Bread van, a standard. It went really slow. This is significant, this one time. So we ended up spending the night with my parents in Bolton, Massachusetts. And the next morning, June 22nd, we got up real early and we were eating breakfast. And this old woman, friend of the family, called after she saw what was happening on the news. And she said to my mother, she was crying, and she said, "It's terrible, they took all the children. And your son's up there." And she said all this. And my mother said, "Well, my son's right here." And she said, "Oh, I'm so glad he's there with his family." And my mother said, "No, he's not." So I got on the phone and I said, "It's going to be okay. I'll let you know what happens." And she said, "Oh, okay. Okay." I didn't know anything. All I knew at that point is I called the block where our Common Sense store was, and there was like 5 people left in the community. They told me what was happening. So we jumped in the old van, and I went as fast as I could. I got on the highway, and it wasn't fast, maybe 40 miles an hour. So this was early morning. It was probably around 7:30 maybe. So we're going up the highway, and I'm just praying, "Oh, I gotta get there, I gotta get there, I gotta get to Newport." And all of a sudden, in my rearview mirror, I see this van coming really fast, and I recognized it. And it was Abner Ryland in the red and white Dodge van. And he had just rebuilt the motor in it. And his family was also up there. And so I flagged him down. This is amazing that I was there right at the right time. Right there. He would have been way past me. And I talked to Tim Shaw, but I don't think the bakery van probably didn't get home till 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So I got in with Abner, and I'm glad there were no state police around that day. I think all the state police were in Newport. I don't even know how fast we were going. We won't get into that. But we made it to Newport. And now that's my side of the story, just for a minute. Now my wife's going to tell you what was going on in Island Pond when I wasn't there.
Well, then we were living in the little friend's house over here. Yeah, where the print shop was, and I remember it was real early in the morning. I was still in bed. Haye was the baby. Sarah and Leah. Sarah was 7 and Leah was 5, and so the police came in and we weren't even up yet, hardly. But he came in and says, "Okay, you all need to get ready. You need to all get dressed and come downstairs." And I think they were going to take pictures of us or whatever. So then we did all that, and then we got ready to get in the, and there was a big bus outside, and we went out there, but they said, "Oh, the bus is full, so you're going to have to get in the police car." So they said that we were going to have to get in the police car. So we got in there, and Barbara Lacey was coming with us because she didn't want me to be by myself there with the girls and the baby. And so we got going, and after a little bit, I started whimpering a little bit, and so then Sarah and Leah started singing a song to me. I had never heard that song before, and so they're going to sing.
Just understand this picture. I wasn't there.
Yeah. Okay.
She's in the back seat of the cruiser with 3 children, no seatbelts, and she had never heard this song before. What did you think about that?
Oh, I was really thankful for that song because it actually really gave me peace, and I knew that our Father was with us, and whatever happened, was fine. It's going to be great. And I knew that, he wasn't
I
there.
didn't know I was on my way.
Yeah, but we were all together. That's what mattered.
So, I got there. And when I walked in, she was right there, and I hugged her, and I said, "Happy birthday." It was her birthday. And then, someone handed me my guitar. Someone had brought instruments. The next thing I knew, we had a celebration.
This next section we wanted to talk about how what was meant to put an end to the movement actually caused an amazing effect of this life going all over the world. And so we're going to have a few people speak about that right now. So, here we go.
I don't have anything necessarily prepared, but I'll give you a little bit of a background from my perspective of 40 years ago. I'm 63, so it's not too hard to do the math that 40 years ago, I was 23. And I'm from Burlington, Vermont, born and raised, the big city of Vermont. And Burlington was the home of probably most of the negative media attention that culminated in the raid in the summer, June 22nd, 1984. And at that point in my young life, I had pretty much turned my back on the media. I didn't have a television, I hadn't had one. I was 23 years old, I hadn't had one since I'd left college. At 19 years old, I didn't have a telephone, I didn't have a radio, and I was kind of in a state of waiting. And I've been told most of my life by my earthly father that regardless of what you hear in the media, that you are to make judgments with your own eyes and your own ears. And my father was someone who knew the governor on a first-name basis. He knew the attorney general. He knew Vermont state senators. And my father knew on a first-name basis all the people that were responsible for the raid. But he was still one who had told me that. And where I was at in my young life of really growing up for many years with a very troubled conscience. I remember as a young child in 1968 and 1969 when the drug culture was coming in through the 60s movement. I remember in grade school watching these films that were a pitiful attempt to try to instill in children a fear of drug dealers. And we would sit there in our little school classrooms and watch, and it was like the picture that was on the screen was like it would be the playground of a school, and then this very shady looking vehicle would pull up with dark windows, and the message was something to the effect of stay away from strangers that could be wanting to influence you with drugs. And you're 9 years old, you're 10 years old, and you're looking at this, oh, if I see those cars, I won't go near them. Little did I know that when I entered high school, it was one of the honor students, female honor student, that introduced me to drugs in my first year of high school. It wasn't a dark car with some drug dealer. It was someone that I never would ever suspect. So anyways, time wouldn't permit for me to go into all the various struggles that I went through growing up. But I came to the point by the time 1984 came along that for one, I did not want to live in society at large. And I'd actually worked very hard to try to find a way to live outside of society. And it was a pretty miserable failure. And when 1984 came around, even though I didn't have a television or a radio or a telephone, I couldn't avoid the news of what was happening. It was everywhere. But really in my heart, where I had come to was I had hoped that maybe these were the people that it talked about in John chapter 15, because as a very simple person that didn't understand much at that time in my life, I would read this verse and knew that it didn't apply to me. It says, if the world hates you, know that it hated me before it hated you. I hated the world, but the world didn't hate me because there was nothing about my life that was a threat to the world. And then it goes on, it said, if you were of the world would love its own. But because you're not of the world, and I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. Remember the word that I said to you, a slave is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they'll persecute you. And when I heard about the raid, somewhere deep down inside of me, I had a hope that maybe these were real disciples. Because I'd given up on finding real disciples in a church. Because during my struggles as a young person of suffering with guilt and alienation from authority, and having close friends that you had an impact on with the choices that you made decide to end their life. Those circumstances had put something into me that wanted to find the Creator. And if He would show me how to be a disciple, that I would give Him my whole life. But there was a condition. Because what I had seen in church was the only one that was giving their whole life was the one behind the pulpit. And in my damaged soul, I knew I could never be there. but I wanted to find a place where I could give my all, whatever that was. And so I stopped going to churches because there was no place for me to give my all. But when I heard of the raid, somewhere deep down was a flicker of hope that maybe these were real people that were genuine disciples. And I had a friend in the community that used to be an aircraft mechanic on a large nuclear aircraft carrier in the United States Navy. And he told me a story. And the story was that when there's a serious accident with a pilot on those type of aircraft carriers that results in either the death of a pilot or the destruction of one of the planes, the first thing that the authority of the Navy do is put forth a certain siren that commands all pilots to get in their planes and take off and fly. Because they understand in the military that one of the most deadly things there is fear. And when he told me this story, it caused me to reflect back on one of the reasons that I'm here, which was when the raid happened, it would have been very easy for the believers in Island Pond to just shrink up and hide in fear. When you know that the whole state was against you. And you are put all over the news by all the major media companies in the United States of America as a dangerous cult. But actually the opposite took place. The good authority of the church in Island Pond was told to go out into towns throughout Vermont and have public meetings and let the public ask questions. You speak your faith and let them speak their questions. And because I was one of those that didn't know about these things because I wasn't connected to the media, there was one of those meetings in my hometown in Burlington, Vermont, the center of most of the negative press against the community. But there was a woman who had worked for my parents for many, many years. My parents owned retail stores in Burlington. And she had known me since I was a young boy, and she knew that I was a searcher. I was seeking for God. And she went to that town meeting. And I saw her the day after the town meeting, not knowing about it. And I went to my parents' store, and she saw me, and she spoke very clearly to me, and she said, I went to the meeting in City Hall in Burlington, and I'm telling you, if you go there, you're going to find what you've been looking for. And then later that evening, I had to go back to that same place where that woman worked. And again, she saw me across the store, and she called out my name, and she said, if you go there, you're going to find your people. And I was in a car that evening, and I arrived here in the little village of Island Pond not long after the raid, and I never left to go home except to tell my parents that I'd found what I'd been looking for. Because that's what I found. And at that time, the community in Island Pond was a very large community. We had 14 houses. Right there where that Dollar General is was a beautiful old, to us it was beautiful, a 3-story old block building. And we had celebrations on the top floor. We had a print shop on the second floor. We had a conference room on the second floor. We had our Common Sense wholesome food store and bakery on the first floor. We had 14 houses full of people. And apart from that, we had a very small little band of disciples that lived in a small fishing village in southwest Nova Scotia. And we had a small band of people that lived in a little household in Boston. It was like a workhouse, and then there was a little small group of believers in Europe. That was our communities at the time of 1984. And that little band of believers in Canada came about because Canadians had come over and experienced the life in Island Pond. And many of them were saved and baptized, but then they couldn't stay in the United States, and they had to go back. And we saw that our Father was going to do something in Canada because these people were bone of our bone and flesh of our flesh. They belong to us. When someone is baptized in the body of Messiah, we lay hands on them. And it's like a marriage. We commit ourselves to them. It's a blood covenant. We covenant ourselves. So when those Canadians were baptized, but they couldn't be with us here in the United States, we had to be with them in Canada. That's how life in Canada began. That's how life in Europe began. We weren't trying to be in Canada. We weren't trying to be in Europe. It just happened through love. From Little Island Pond, these things happened. And it wasn't long after that, in 1987, I remember we lined these streets right here. And many of us were out in front of the Common Sense store. And we had our little flags. And my firstborn child was 1 year old on my hip. And we were waving goodbye because Noon and Judith, stand up. Stand up, they're in the back. There they are. We were sending them all the way to the South Pacific to go to New Zealand and look for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And that's what they did. And they were away for many, many years, and many, many precious disciples were made that are now disciples in the body of Messiah, that are New Zealanders. Many of them now are in Australia. They ended up going to Australia. A year or two later, we laid hands on a brother named Nahaliel and his wife, Havdalah, right here in Island Pond. And we sent them back to the country that he was raised in. He was a dual citizen. He was a Brazilian and an American. He had American parents who were missionaries, but he was raised in Brazil. And we laid hands on him and sent him back. And now there are large communities in Brazil as a result of that couple's life, of just going with nothing to Brazil except the hope of the gospel and of reaching out to people and opening up our homes. and eventually, while this vibrant life that was here in Island Pond, 14 households, we had our Common Sense store, we had fledgling little cottage industries. While we were developing, over in Europe, something extraordinary was also happening. Our Father led us to a place in France. And there in France, Spanish people were being saved, English people were being saved, German people were being saved, and they were all together in Europe. Just like many of us from all over the United States were coming here to this little village called Island Pond. And then later on, from this same little place, people were sent to the Midwest. We eventually spread out to other parts of New England, and eventually went out to the West Coast, to the southeast part of the United States. So some of you have probably wondered why things got kind of small in Island Pond. Well, we're not going away. We're going forward. Because our Father's done something extraordinary. He's created bonds, very, very deep bonds, through the life of sacrifice that we've been brought into. There's not a lot of places left on earth where there's enough constitutional freedom to actually be true disciples. Because a true disciple has to have the freedom to own something. Because if you don't have the freedom to own it, you don't have the freedom to give it up. And the real demonstration of how valuable you think the Savior is what you're willing to give for Him. Just like in marriage. Not this contemporary rubbish they call marriage now, with all these prenuptial agreements, but true marriage. When a man finds the woman he's been looking for, and that woman finds in that man the man she's been looking for, those two give up everything for one another. They actually share everything in common. And it's always been that way from the earliest times. And that's just like the way the church is. When you see the worth of the Savior, you will give everything to Him. It's not a question of, do you have to give up everything? It should be, what else do I have that I could give? And that's what I found in the body of Messiah, was something worth giving my all for. My all was pretty broken, what I had to give. But I'm thankful for what we have. And so, thank you, Island Pond, for being a place of protection for us, because you've actually been a place where we could grow up and develop. And we're actually very, very thankful for the opportunity to be back and do something wonderful over there on that corner for the precious people in this area, because we want to continue to make disciples. Terrible, terrible times are coming on the earth. People are looking for places of safety. They're looking for places of refuge. We expect to make many, many more disciples here in this area. So we love you very much. We're thankful for the freedom that we have to gather like this and to speak our hearts. And we'd love to get to know you more better.
I'm from the West Coast, one of those places where we went to some 20 plus years ago. But 40 years ago, I was a father in Island Pond with 3 children and a pregnant wife. And we were taken in the rain. And like a friend shared this morning at our gathering, we didn't really know what was going on. I wish I would have thought of the flood imagery right away, but I didn't. It seemed like the tide was coming in. And it was irresistible, and we were powerless. But at a certain point, it was remarkable. I looked around. The state troopers were so tired, they'd probably been up 48 hours getting ready. The social workers were discouraged. I didn't really know what was going on in court. I saw Benai and Hannah come back looking shell-shocked. It was intense at first. I didn't know all that was happening. All I knew is I was there. We were celebrating. And there was a festive atmosphere. And as time went on, it seemed like the tide was going out. We were encouraged. Our encouragement was growing. You know, finally we went home singing on the buses. It was absolutely extraordinary. It was a miracle. It was a miracle. So that morning, Judge Mayiti was called to serve on that court, on that bench that day by Administrative Judge Thomas Hayes. And he was called as the most brilliant judge in Vermont because Thomas Hayes knew he would rule according to the Constitution. And he was a constitutional scholar of the first order. Anyone who knew him knew what a man of integrity and conscience he was. He probably realized he was sacrificing his career by ruling justly that day. And so, but that morning, before he got on the bench, I want to tell you what he did. Because this is what he told Judge Ellen Hodgkin of Guildhall, a Vermont family court judge for 30 years, now 86. Soon to die, he tells us. The doctors give him a few months. When he heard what we were doing, he wanted to tell the world about Judge Frank Mayiti. He had something to tell. I'm not going to read all he said, but I want to tell about the most significant part. So you can see the heart of this man, the heart that was hidden from us for all these years, but we had to suspect it was true. So in the class that Judge Mayiti was giving to some 30 prospective judges, he took Alan Hodgson around, aside, separately, and he gave him a piece of paper. He said, "This is the most important paper you will ever need as a judge." It was a prayer. He gave Alan a prayer. Alan prayed that prayer every day before he sat on the bench. We know Judge Mayiti did too. So, at the end of the day, Judge Mayiti said, "I was only doing my job. I was only doing my duty." But how did he conceive of his duty? What was in his heart about being a judge? I'm going to read you a few excerpts of this prayer. Maybe we'll publish what Judge Hodgson said. But I just want to read you a few excerpts so you can see the heart of this man and why he stood up there so thoughtfully, asking the state, case after case, "What evidence do you have?" And a religious belief is not evidence of abuse. O God of all truth, knowledge, and judgment, without whom nothing is true or wise or just, look down with mercy upon your servants, whom you let sit in earthly seats of judgment. Enlighten their ignorance, inspire their judgments, and of your infinite mercy, so direct and dispose my heart, that I may fulfill this day all my duties in your fear and fall into no error of judgment. Give me grace to hear patiently, to consider diligently, to understand rightly, and to decide justly. Grant me due sense of humility, that I be not misled by my willfulness, vanity, or egotism. Without your gracious guidance, I can do nothing right. Have mercy upon me, this graduate of Dartmouth and Georgetown University, whom Senator Patrick Leahy went to college with at Georgetown and said he was the brightest man in the class, who wept as that song you heard was sung at Judge Mayiti's funeral. This was this man's heart. I want you to know him. Have mercy upon me, a poor, weak, frail sinner groping in the dark, and give me grace to judge others now, that I might not be myself be judged when you come to judge the world with your truth. So yes, I'm a judge, but you're going to judge me someday. I want to judge with your truth today, so you won't condemn me on that day. Judge Mayiti prayed this that morning before he sat in that courthouse in Newport, Vermont, and talked to each parent and saw each child. It's very hard not to weep about such a man. I'm here actually to talk about what happened since then. But I had to tell you about Judge Mayiti and his friend Judge Hodgson and many friends like him around this state. And these are the righteous men of the nations that Hava was speaking of earlier. These are those who have a place in eternal life because of their righteous judgments and righteous deeds. So when I was a young man, maybe, I don't know, at one point, I read in the Bible. I read the Bible. I grew up Roman Catholic. We didn't read the Bible. But I read the Bible. And I read, so likewise, whoever of you does not forsake all that he has cannot be my disciple. Luke 14:33. And when I read that verse, I heard something in my heart, and I had no peace in my life. ever, until I met the community and a place where I could give up all things. Either the Son of God meant what he said, or I might as well toss the book in the trash. If he didn't mean that to be his disciple I had to give up everything, then I really didn't want to have anything to do with him, because he didn't mean what he said. And somehow faith was born in me. I consider it a gift of God. I don't know where it came from. But the desire to find a people that I could trust everything to was relentless in my soul. Until I found the community in Island Pond. And so from that place, we went forth. We went out on the town meetings. We sent out walkers and had smaller town meetings in the years to come. We went out. Our delis give our communities an outward direction. Our children give our communities a forward direction. We're not going inward and we're not going backward. Our failures are forgiven, and we're trying with all of our hearts to learn from them. We want to learn what it really means to turn our hearts to our children. We want to take advantage of the freedom we have in those places where constitutional freedoms are protected. We have a vision of, we know where we are in history. If you want to know who you are, you have to know your history. And if you want to know your history, I strongly suggest you read what the men and women who lived then. If you want to know about the Pilgrims, read about William Bradford. If you want to know why this country is the way it is, read Roger Williams. If you want to know what God thinks about human affairs, you have to read the Bible. And so in the Bible is something that came to us as revelation and caused us to go out and not go in. And it's in Isaiah 49. It's the most marvelous verse. It inspired a generation of people to sacrifice all they had here and continue to sacrifice all they had to support those very fragile beginnings around the world, like in Brazil. Indeed, he says, it is too small a thing that you should be my servant to raise up the tribes of Jacob and to restore the preserved ones of Israel. I will also give you as a light to the Gentiles, that you should be my salvation to the ends of the earth. So that has been our heart and our hope and the driving force behind us. That the gospel that produces a life where people share all things in common, just as they did in Jerusalem 2,000 years ago, would go out and find a place because of the hearts of people who would receive it. That's what happened in Island Pond. That's what happened every place we've gone. That's what we've devoted our lives to. There's no greater cause a man can give his life to than bringing about all that's in our Father's Word. There's no greater cause. It's been worth everything. One thing I wanted to tell you that hasn't been said today. On that day of the raid, and before that week, not one thought, not one word was heard. I didn't hear it anyway. I didn't even have the thought of fleeing Island Pond. The state was worried about us fleeing. They had contingency plans in place. They thought we might get on a boat and go to Nova Scotia or something. Not one word was heard by anyone I knew to flee, because with our people we stand. If we would have fled, it simply would have been evidence that we didn't believe. But we believed and we stood. And the odd promise of persecution because we believed was fulfilled. And so we were delivered because we had a heart to obey His word. That's still the heart we have. That's still the heart we want to bring to others. That's all.
There's a man here named Del Green, who is the son of an officer that was one of the officers during the raid that wanted to speak.
Oh, good. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, what a place I just went into over there. Is that ridiculous? How many people in the world can build something like that? It's just amazing. Anyway, I got to cheat a little, I guess you could call it that, because Rod took me in the other day and I was talking with, I believe him to be a carpenter that was working there. And I said something about how beautiful it was, and it must have taken a lot to, the money you can spend to come up with all this stuff, to make this what it is. And he said, you know, we build a lot of things with stuff that other people throw away.
Yeah.
Boy, did they ever. I'm so impressed. Anyway, maybe it's because I'm 82. I'll put these on. Oh, this is what I'm doing. Okay. When I was here the other day, I was thinking about, I actually live in Derby, have a camp on the side of the community. For most of my life, back and forth through this community, and I know a lot of people, and I know a lot of you folks. So it made me think the other day how much everybody helps each other. And I saw these, coming home from work, you know, I can't get my wife to work anymore. She's only 78. I don't get it. But I'm 82 and she makes me work. So I'm coming home and I stopped, and there's two little girls over there on step ladders. One of them's holding the step ladder and the other girl's washing windows. That's family, isn't it?
Yeah.
More people ought to see that. I went through something called Act 250. It's when you divide up a bunch of land to maybe make some lots to sell. I did that years ago because I knew I didn't have any retirement. And maybe I got to do something. Looking ahead, I did that. I managed to buy a piece of property, and I went through Act 250. And the time has come. I have a beautiful log home with everything you'd want, and the stairs don't like me anymore. I had 2 sets of them, and my wife and I decided we probably ought to move to something smaller on 1 floor. So I got a hold of a surveyor to come and do some things for me, and found out that Act 250 made a lot of changes. So the surveyor was an awfully nice guy and promised he would do something, and so over 3 months later he had done nothing, and I continued to badger him a little, but I never lost my patience. He was a nice man. Finally admitted he couldn't do anything this year, which was last year. So I went to another fellow, kind of went round and round there. It's late in the summer. I said, oh my God, if I ever sold my home, I can never put up another one now. But we moved forward, like you folks do. And he finally told me he just couldn't get it done. So I went to a third guy, and I'm talking to him about it and stuff, and I pretty much made up my mind I would go with him. And I'm still working over in Bloomfield for one of the nicest men I've ever worked for. And he had just had a surveyor do quite a project for him, and he was extremely happy with him. And I said, "Who's that?" So it was Rod. I bet you all know Rod in the town here, the surveyor. Well, I just thought, well, he doesn't know me and I don't know him. Well, here I go again, number 4. So I call him up. But number 4 is my lucky number. So I thought, well, we'll see how this goes. He comes to my house the next day. This is a miracle for me. So he has been working in and out of my home there for 3 or 4 weeks and has everything nearly completed. It's a difficult job. Just locating the pins and the things that he did. I spent a lot of time trying to find some of those pins for an irregular shaped parcel, and I think maybe there's about 8 or 9 that are important, and I found 2. Well, I went to college for a little while and I wanted to be a surveyor, and I know just enough to know that you don't go too far with 2 pins. You really do need 3 to get started to find 4, 5, and 7, and 9. Well, I don't know how he did it, but they're done. So, yeah, hats off. Anyway, had a chance to talk with Rod quite a bit. And I came back from Alaska, I can't remember exactly what year, but I had some money in my pocket and I bought a piece of land across, for those of you who are from the area, across from the Elks Club in Derby, and I built a building that is now a redemption center. And I sold Honda motorcycles, Polaris snow machines, I had the Evinrude franchise, I had a little sports shop, and then I picked up the Husqvarna chainsaw franchise. Well, if you sell things cheap and figure out a way to do it, and it's good stuff, people will come. The smallest franchise I had was the chainsaw thing. Well, there were a lot of loggers in the area, more than there are today. Yeah. Somebody pull a plug off me. I can take a hint, you know, but I'm not done. I met some of you people who were doing a lot of work with the chainsaws, clearing land, the right-of-ways, logging, putting up firewood, and one by one and more of you came. And there might have been only 8 or 10, but I did a lot of business with you. I got a few tips, and I started selling bulk bar and chain oil out of 55-gallon drums outside with a spigot on it, you know, a spout. And if I had any brains, I'd put a padlock on it because we weren't there 24/7. These guys, I wish some of them were here, but probably they're not. They came a lot and they bought chains, replacement chains for the chainsaws. I could sell replacement chain cheaper if I bought it in bulk. So I fixed up a thing where you could, we had to do it to cut it for you, but if you came in with a certain saw, we would cut, you know, 38 links and splice it together. It was a little time consuming, but I could still sell it cheaper than if you bought the packages hanging. So, this group would come more often than others, and if I'm having my men fix those chains, that's time consuming. But if some of this group would do it for themselves, I don't have to wait on them. So they did that. For several years, they came and I saw them come in and sign their name somewhere, and that was it. But they paid. They fixed their own chains, and they got bar and chain oil in bulk. They bring their own gallon jugs or whatever. Finally, I decided, well, I can make this easier. I'll tell them where the key is to that 55-gallon drum. So I probably honestly had 20 to 25 loggers in the area, and not just here, around within 40 miles. And nobody else knew where that key was. I would say, yes, they got more than the others, but they were trustworthy people. So, until the day I closed that shop, no other logger in probably 2 counties knew where that key was. What's that say? I was going to have my wife come up. Have I got this back?
Yeah.
And come down and keep me straightened out here, because I'm kind of ad-libbing and skipping over some. Oh, here's one. These boys, young men, they got to pay me. I mean, they're buying chainsaws and buying chain oil and chain and files. And we put it on a slip, and the next whatever day, we were open 7 days a week, they'd come in and pay. And all those years, when I finally closed that business, they never owed me not a penny. I can't name them, but I could sure tell you a few others who did. I'd like to name them. If one of them was here, I'd like to ask him to stand up. I'd like to get back to something you folks were on, and I don't like the word raid. Who does? But I'm going to talk about it just for a little bit. I don't think there's many of you here that knew my father. His name was Bill Green, and he was the head of the state police in northeastern Vermont. Had a lot of men under him, and he was a big rugged man and a very quiet man. Didn't say too much, but if he said something, you probably want to listen. He was famous for never arresting people, and that's the truth. But boy, did people get a lecture. More than one person, as we got older, we meaning my brothers and I, would hear of the things that he did when he picked somebody up and was headed maybe with them in the back of the cruiser for DWI or something, and he gave them choices somewhere along the way, and these people would stop my brothers and I through our earlier years and say, "Did you ever know what your dad did to me?" No? I said, well, a famous one was, if you were drinking and he pulled you over and he thought you weren't too bad, and if it wasn't winter, he'd take your car keys and he'd leave you there, wherever you were parked, and tell you he'd be back. And maybe 4, 5, 6 hours later, he'd be back, get you out, walk you around the car, and tell you if you're fit to go home, you go home. If I ever catch you again, you're going to jail, whether you're drunk or not. I remember that. I've had, not much lately, but so many that said things to us like that. And I had a young man come to me once, when he was an older man, and said, "Did you ever hear what your dad did to me?" I said, "No, just join the crew." He said, "I've gotten a little trouble and I stole some things and your father caught me." So threw me in the back of the cruiser and headed to Newport. It was from out in this area. And he said, we got about halfway to Newport. He pulled over beside the road and he said, "I was in the back of the cruiser and I was handcuffed." He said, "I think I'm going to give you a choice I give some others once in a while. You know where I'm headed, don't you?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, where? He said, maybe the jail. He said, yeah. He said, I know where we could stop on the way, and then the choice is after that. So I found out through the years that this happened 3 or 4 times that I heard of. But he said, we're going to the Army recruiter, and then you can make your choice. And I'm going to stay there till you do. He said, an hour later I was in the Army. So, my dad honestly was a very quiet man. And he didn't talk to us boys much about anything. If we heard something happened on the street, hey Dad, what happened to so-and-so? He'd always say, if I wanted you to know, I would have already told you. So we didn't get much info. So one day, I was oldest of 4 boys, and he never confided in us for much of anything that he had to. Our mother passed away. He was trying to bring up 4 boys as well. Anyway, one day he said, you know, you're going to hear something tomorrow, and I want to tell you something, so you don't think I'm part of it. Okay. He said, the commissioner called me, it's the commissioner of state police, and said, they're going to pull a raid in Island Pond and take some children. And you're joking. I mean, we knew these people. We knew you. So he said, no. He said, you keep your mouth shut. But I just want you to know, before you hear it on the street, that I'm not having any part of it. None at all. I thought, really? He said, well, there's more to it. He said, I told the commissioner that I will have no part of this. I've been the head of this district for a long time. I've never had a problem with one of them out there ever. I've never heard of any of the boys giving them a parking ticket. Nothing, ever. And they're barking up the wrong tree. And I will have nothing to do with it. And the commissioner said, Bill Green, if you don't, you could lose your job. And my dad said, you know what? You force me, and I'll retire in an hour, and I'll have a better job with more pay and no more night work with a bunch of drunks. So you just say the word, but I will not be in Island Pond that day. And he was not.